Normally, being reminded of what you already know might be unpleasant, but when it comes to classics of literature, it's amazing. So today I want to talk about Martin Eden, which is written by Jack London in 1909. So the book is about a young man trying to be someone important, basically. A brief summary of the story is that Martin Eden is a working class man. He is about 20 years old. One day, he saves a guy from some kind of fight. And then this guy invites him to his house. Then there he meets Ruth. Ruth is the sister of this man, Arthur. And then he falls in love with the girl. He tries everything he can to be with the girl. But in the end, they don't end up together. Ruth marries someone else, and Martin Eden becomes a successful writer, but alone. So, why did I choose to talk about this book? Because, as I said in the beginning, being reminded of things that you already know might be unpleasant in real life. But in these classics, it is subtle. And it is the conclusion that you derive from the book. This is a very pleasant feeling, and you're like, oh, that's a thing. I remember it now. That was something that I should pay attention. So, Martin Eden overall is about everything wrong in society. What I mean by everything wrong? There are three main themes in the book. One is social class, then we have love and politics. The book takes place just before this quite a complicated era, because just before World War I, and it was the rise of the socialist ideas all over the world. We will get into that a bit later. But first of all, the most prominent one is the class struggle. Whether it's directly about socialism or not, it's the main theme of the book, because Martin is a working class man and Ruth is an aristocrat. She's very well educated, very articulate, very well aware of everything around her, and she's very knowledgeable. With her class, with the wealth, they also acquire education. On the contrary, when you're a working class person, you get neither of them. Martin couldn't even finish the grammar school back then. When he was talking, he was using wrong grammar, wrong vocabulary. So there is a quite huge difference between Ruth and Martin intellectually. But he falls in love with Ruth, but Ruth doesn't really reciprocate in the beginning. She is somehow impressed by his other qualities, and even though he's uneducated, he is actually an intelligent person. She finds him interesting. When Martin Eden is invited to this dinner, he looks around and looks at the house. Everything is so beautiful, it's full of art, everyone is well educated, and he immediately compares himself to those people. And then he says to himself that I want to be like them. He immediately gets back to school and tries to complete his grammar school while working. That's important detail, because he has to work. He lives with his sister and her husband, but they're not happy with him because he doesn't work as much as they want to. His husband always complains, etc. He's really in an uncomfortable situation. But his situation with his family and his work doesn't really stop him from being intellectual, because he keeps studying, keeps reading, and after some point, he quits the job and he mainly focuses on reading and spending time in the library, a lot of time there. Even though Martin tries so hard to close the gap between them, between him and Ruth, it's practically impossible. This is something we can infer from the book, because Ruth has been subjected to education since basically her birth. She has a college degree. At that time, her social class enabled her to acquire intellectualism alone without needing to work. So that is totally different than deciding to get educated after some point in your life with lots of struggle. Even if the gap was totally gone and they were at the same level intellectually, they could read the same books, they could create, they could discuss, they could work on new ideas together. Still, this wouldn't be enough for Martin to be an aristocrat, because you have to be born that way. You are born to your social class, and changing that much of a drastic change is basically impossible. This idea is supported by other things about rich people, aristocratic rich people. The aristocrat in the book, they try to gatekeep the intellectualism. So money, intellectualism, art, all only happens in upper class. Obviously, Martin wants to be one of them. He does so much, and he actually becomes an intellectual too, but this is not enough. For a very long time, Martin is very, very poor. He doesn't have any money. And because Martin is poor in the beginning and for most of the book, even though he says very clever things, very intelligent things, or very interesting ideas he presents at the dinners, he's never taken too seriously. And of course, there is the hypocrisy afterwards, because Martin Eden becomes a successful writer, and then they try to include him all those events they organize. They refused to invite Martin Eden before, and then after he becomes a bit famous and he earns some money, he is invited to so many events that he cannot go to all of them. And then he doesn't want to go because he knows it's not real. Even though they invite him, they didn't care for his opinion when he was poor. So he's like, what has changed? I'm the same person, I think the same, my opinions didn't change, my talent didn't change, I was the same person as before. Just because I was poor, you didn't care for my ideas, now you invite me all those events. And this hypocrisy disturbs Martin, and he doesn't want to participate in those kinds of events. This could be the second wrong thing about society: class differences and hypocrisy of people. This brings us to some political themes. In the beginning, as Martin reads more about politics and philosophy, he thinks that individualistic efforts will help someone to change their class and change their means or benefits that they get from their talent, etc. So he thinks the solution to the problems that they are facing is not socialism, it's more of an individualistic approach. He reached this conclusion by reading by himself and reading the books without discussing with anyone else. Then he makes a friend, Russ. Russ is an old intellectual, old writer. He's not as active as he's before. He's about in his 60s, and Russ is a socialist. When Martin meets Russ, they discuss these political issues, and he takes him to the different meetings. And at that one of those meetings, Martin Eden is mistaken for a socialist, and this becomes a big problem with Ruth's family, but we will get into that. His friendship with Russ makes him actually despise socialism even more. Every man should be capable of doing things for themselves, and they should try hard and they should get it. This is how Martin Eden thinks. That's why he doesn't really like the idea of socialism. But when you look into all the events happened and the tragedy of his death at the end, maybe he was wrong, because being individualistic took him to somewhere, yeah, but he didn't have a community, and he was so alone that he basically committed suicide. Maybe the message from this politics part, is that we need each other and we need to work together for our future. This is a very, very basic thing, and we feel like, oh, I know that. Of course, everyone knows that. But when it comes to real life, we tend to forget that. It's not something actually we can disregard so fast, especially with everything happening right now, that I would like to talk about it more, how people are lonelier than before, or maybe they feel like they are lonelier, but they don't really think that they have power over their loneliness, etc. This is a very long topic, but I think this is really important that we are reminded of these things. Just like Pink Floyd said, together we stand, divided we fall. I personally don't like romance books, or I'm not very into romantic works so much, but I loved how love is described in this book. I think Martin actually experiences a very common thing that we all do, a very popular phrase currently that we all use. Does he want to be Ruth, or does he want to be with Ruth? So I think that's a very good question for Martin. We get our answer, I think, in the book, because in the beginning, he's like super impressed by everything she does. Even a very simple sentence that she says, he is melting, and he's like, oh my God, she is amazing. She is a marvelous woman. Then he looks down on the other girls around him. All these girls are so stupid. Ruth is amazing. She's so smart. She is great. I think this is more like an admiration thing. Martin feels love and admiration at the same time. Later on, when they spend more time together, they discuss on the books, ideas, etc. And during that time, I think his love becomes more intense, and he actually loves Ruth. But Ruth is precocious. Her parents constantly warn her about Martin, and that's why I think she doesn't let herself feel love that strong. And then, as the time goes by, they actually get engaged. But they cannot get married right away because Martin doesn't have a job, doesn't have a career, so he needs to build up something. Martin says, oh, give me 2 years, I will be a successful writer, and then everything will be fine, and we can get married. And Ruth agrees on that in the first place. But in the first year, all his effort is in vain. He keeps getting rejected by the magazines or publishers. So this makes Ruth lose her faith just a little. And then she offers Martin to do a regular job, like a clerk, one of her father's businesses. And then Martin refuses it because he doesn't want to do that. He knows that he can be more, and he wants to do more. He still has 1 more year. So he says, I will try. A few months more, he tries and tries, writes and writes and writes all the time. One day, not even face to face, Ruth sends her a letter and says that she can't be with him under these circumstances, and she loses her faith altogether at that point. Interestingly, Martin Eden is not devastated, because I expected, when I was reading the book, I kind of sensed that Ruth will not be with him at the end because she's too insecure. She is too worried about what everyone else thinks because she's raised that way, which is perfectly normal. Even though it looks like she has a lot of choice, she doesn't really have that much of a choice. And she is older than Martin, so she needs to make a marriage decision soon. I wasn't surprised by that, but I expected Martin to feel devastated and lose his mind, basically. He kept on working. He didn't give up his ideals. Of course, he felt bad about it, but it didn't really stop him. It didn't cut him out of life. Maybe his love turned into something different towards the end of their relationship. The love thing is a bit complicated, I think, here. There's still something wrong about society, about love, is that people care too much about others' opinions on their relationships. So this is also something very well known fact. So many movies, so many TV shows, so many books have the very similar message. Don't think too much about what others say. But still, we do. So I think this was also one of those things that we should be reminded of once in a while. When it comes to the language use in this book, it's amazing because the way Martin Eden talks changed drastically over the course of his education. And I learned that this book is autobiographical. There are huge differences with his own personal life, but mostly the beginning of it is quite similar to his personal life. All the lessons that he gathered from life, he actually transferred to us as readers. And I'm glad that I encountered this book, because I actually didn't encounter this book. one of my best friends' favorite book. So there is also another thing that I really like about this book is trying super hard doesn't necessarily take you where it's supposed to take you. Because in here, yeah, Martin gets the success towards the very end of the 2 year that he promised, but there are so many others who would not get lucky, because Martin Eden got lucky. In one scene, Martin Eden's a very small amount of pay is late, and he is curious about what's happening in the publishing house, and he takes a trip with his lost money to this publishing house, and then he tries to talk to these guys, and they don't even listen to him properly. And he thinks that, oh, they don't even listen to me. Maybe they don't even read my work. They keep rejecting me, and he sees there are a pile of different documents all over. In that scene, he loses some of his faith, and I think that's a very important scene. Even though you put a lot of effort into something, you may not get anything from it. And I think this is just a sad truth about life. So I think overall, I love this book. Important message in the book. Individualistic approach probably will not solve our problems. And love can be many things. Admiration, love, pure love, joy, a lot of things at the same time. And it can be very ungrateful too. I know these are basics, but I guess they are basics for a reason. This is what I got from the book. So I hope you liked the video. Please let me know your thoughts. Bye.